The First World War was the bloodiest conflict in Canadian history, with nearly 61,000 Canadian deaths. However, the great achievements of Canadian soldiers on battlefields such as Vimy and Passchendaele ignited a sense of national pride in Canada. It was a turning point in Canadian history, and the many impacts of the conflict continue to affect Canadians today. In this video, I will be discussing the causes of World War I and how they worked together to start the bloodiest conflict humankind has ever seen. There were 6 main causes. To begin, militarism, as defined by Alfred Watz, a German historian who served in World War I, was the domination of the military man over the civilian. Militarism was a significant force in several European nations in the years prior to World War I. Their governments were strongly influenced, if not dominated, by military leaders, their interests, and priorities. Generals and admirals often acted as de facto government ministers and demanded increases in defense and arms spending. Militarism also fathered the arms race, which gave rise to new military technologies which contributed to the destruction of the war. Furthermore, militarism affected more than just policy. It also shaped culture, the media, and public opinion. The press held up military leaders as heroes, while painting rival nations as aggressive but weak. Militarism alone did not start World War I, but it created an environment where war was considered the best way of resolving disputes, rather than negotiation or diplomacy. Militarism, nationalism, and imperialism were all intrinsically connected. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, military power was considered a measure of national and imperial strength. Another cause was imperialism, a system where powerful nations controlled and exploited their colonies. This provided both a cause and context for World War I. In most cases, the imperial nation, often referred to as the mother country, established control over its colonies through coercion. Once conquered, the territory would be claimed as a colony. Colonies often had some military or geopolitical advantages, but their main purpose was economic. They existed to enrich the imperial nation. In most cases, this involved the supply of precious metals or other resources such as timber, rubber, or rice. Colonies were also sources of cheap labor, agricultural land, and trading points. Canada was one of Britain's many colonies, and so when Britain went to war, so did Canada. In fact, the British Empire famously occupied 1/4 of the globe, and so, "the sun never sets on Britain" was a famous slogan of the mid-19th century. Other significant imperial powers at the time included France, Russia, Germany, Italy, and Austria-Hungary. The scramble for Africa promoted aggression between the European nations as countries fought for the untapped resources and power that the African nations offered. This led to several diplomatic incidents between countries such as the Moroccan crises. In addition, the deterioration of the Ottoman Empire attracted the attention of European powers who sought influence in the Balkans and Eastern Europe. With colonies offering an abundance of different resources, empires were able to mass-produce items, including weapons, at a rate never seen before, and this led to even further tension between the nations. In addition, the economic competition between empires, especially Great Britain and Germany, also increased the tensions. Another factor was industrialism. Industrialism led to an increased economic competition among European nations and with China, Japan, the United States, and Latin American countries. It allowed for new machinery to be produced and at a faster rate than ever before. This increase in technology, combined with old war tactics, led to a total carnage that shocked the world. There were many new weapons to be found in World War I that increased the deadliness of war. These included movable machine guns, chlorine gas, flamethrowers, zeppelins, planes, and torpedoes. Many different weapons were also improved throughout the war, including rifles, pistols, grenades, and submarines. The next cause was nationalism, which was the extreme form of patriotism and loyalty to one's country. Nationalists placed the interests of their own countries above the interests of other countries and was prevalent in early 20th century Europe. Most pre-war Europeans believed in the cultural, economic, and military supremacy of their nation, and these attitudes were fueled by propaganda. The pages of newspapers were often packed with nationalist rhetoric and inflammatory stories or rumors about rival nations. Nationalism gave citizens excessive confidence in their nation, their governments, and their military strength. and it convinced many citizens that their nation was being threatened by the hungry imperialism of its rivals. Nationalist and militarist rhetoric assured people that if war were to happen, that without a doubt their nation would emerge as victorious. As a result, almost all citizens supported and even encouraged their country's entrance into the war. Militarism, imperialism, and nationalism contributed to a mass delusion that made a European war seem both necessary and winnable. The assassination of Austro-Hungarian Archduke Franz Ferdinand is widely accepted as the spark for World War I. Nationalism played a critical role in the assassination, which was carried out by Gavrilo Princip, a member of the Serbian nationalist group called the Black Hand. The political objective of the assassination and group was to break off Austria-Hungary's South Slav provinces so that they could be combined into Yugoslavia. The series of events that ensued was the beginning of World War I. Austria-Hungary blamed the Serbian government for the attack and gave them an ultimatum. Unsatisfied with Serbia's response, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia on July 28, 1914. The main cause for the carnage of World War I was the alliance system. Before 1914, Europe's main powers were divided into the Triple Entente, made up of Britain, Russia, and France, and the Triple Alliance comprising of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. Although these alliances were defensive in nature, it meant that any conflict between one country from each alliance was bound to involve the other countries, and thus, this was the main reason for the war being so large and deadly. A remarkable sequence of events that led to the great extent of the Great War was the result of all the factors I mentioned earlier in tandem with the alliance system. After Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, Russia, bound by treaty to Serbia, announced the mobilization of its vast army in her defense. Germany, allied to Austria-Hungary, viewed the Russian mobilization as an act of war against Austria-Hungary, and so it declared war on Russia on August 1st. France, bound by treaty to Russia, found itself at war against Germany and by extension on Austria-Hungary. Britain entered the war on August 4th due to her alliance with France as well as Germany's invasion of neutral Belgium. Britain committed herself to Belgium's defense due to a 75-year-old treaty, and like France, she was by extension also at war with Austria-Hungary. With Britain's entry into the war, her colonies and dominions abroad such as Canada, Australia, India, New Zealand, and the Union of South Africa were also at war. Colonies offered military and financial assistance. The United States had a policy of absolute neutrality until its commercial shipping was threatened, and when that happened, the US finally entered the war. Japan, honoring a military agreement with Britain, declared war on Germany on August 23rd. 2 days later, Austria-Hungary responded by declaring war on Japan. Italy, although allied to both Germany and Austria-Hungary, was able to avoid entering the fray by citing a clause enabling it to evade its obligations to both. And in May 1915, she finally joined the conflict, siding with the Allies against her two former allies. A.J.P. Taylor, an English historian, said that the alliances created an excessively rigid diplomatic framework within which relatively small detonators could produce huge explosions. The alliance systems had the most impact on the scale of the war, as what was initially intended as a limited and brief war between Austria-Hungary and Serbia became the deadliest war in history.